Good evening, folks. I'm Len Rydell, the Executive Director of the Blue and Gray Education Society, and I'd like to welcome you to probably, about our 11th or 12th lecture, an interview of 2022, combined with some 20 some odd we did last year. There's a nice little archive on YouTube of some great historians like Lee and Jim Ogden and Gordon Ray and any number of people that have been interviewed about the programs that they're offering through Blue and Gray and stuff. You can go. Karen has put that up right here. You see, we have what's that? 326 subscribers. So if you're not a subscriber, just take a quick look and see what you're missing. Hour and a half, hour 20 minutes. All types of things. Brian Wills, Kent Brown, Paul Severance, Bob Jenkins. So if you're not into that, you ought to get into it. And you see some things are really popular. Some things have had 1,000 views. Others have had a couple of hundred. Some have had 50 or 60. It just depends on what your interest is and so forth. But we do welcome you to take a look at that and pick up what you can pick up. I welcome you to that. Again, it's the Blue and Gray YouTube channel, and it is free, so go ahead and sign up for that. The other thing I'd point you to, if you're not an active tour person, but want to pick up some of the history and so forth, you'll see right here in the middle of our website, video archives, and we have the best part of 350 or so archives there. If you're a member of Blue and Gray and you haven't signed up for that, you should. You can see just some of the stuff that is in there, just scores of them. We basically have all of our lectures from about 1994 through about 2004 are up there, and that's when we stopped doing it. But that is a tremendous resource as well. So if you're an active member of Blue and Gray, this is part of your benefit. And if you have any questions about doing so and you're not a member, get a hold of me, and we'll see what we can do to get you involved in that. What we're here to talk about tonight. One other thing I want to say before we get into transition this. Our host, of course, is Karen Needles, a person whom I have a tremendous amount of affection and respect for. Karen, for about 25 years, has devoted herself assiduously to being in the National Archives, and she has put together and has been managing a site, the Lincoln Archives, which she's been running for about 25 years. It is an effort to digitize all the archives of the Lincoln administration. We have concluded we have a time estimate on it at Karen's current pace of doing this. She has, I think, about 200,000 documents scanned or so forth. With 11 million documents in the site, we figure that she will finally finish this somewhere around the year 2525. But what she has put up there is really fascinating. You see 1862, you see the Dakota War, the Lincoln assassination, imprisonment of Lincoln and Davis, the trial of Lincoln, the Indians and the Dakota Wars in 62, and the trial records of all of them, in which with 38 or 39 Indians were hanged just right after Christmas 1862. Lincoln commuted the sentences of another 360. So all those are the original scanned documents and so forth, so for you to look at. So if you haven't gotten into that, go to the Lincoln Archives, and it is an educational project. Karen just never has gotten around to make it in a 501c3. If you can throw a few coins, they need the software for this about $20 20 years old or so, and Karen needs to do a complete software swap out to keep this thing viable and keep the site from crashing at some time in the not so distant future. So, if you support this kind of work, enjoy it and make a donation. It's not tax deductible, but you'll be helping to keep some really fascinating stuff online and grow this site a little bit. So, okay, that's your commercial, Karen. Shut it down. I do think a great deal of it, and I've spent a fair amount of time in there, and you won't be bored in the time you spend in it. But our purpose for being here tonight is to talk with our good friend Lee White. I've known Lee for probably 10, 15 years now, and we've been working together for a good portion of that time. And of course, everybody knows Jim Ogden because he's been the historian at Chickamauga since right after Christ was born. And he doesn't show any intentions whatsoever of ever retiring. However, those of you who have had the good fortune of meeting Lee or working with Lee is to realize that they have an heir and a spare at Chickamauga, and so there are two really remarkable historians there. And if you've been out with Lee, as we have a number of times now, you're very, very well served to be with him. Tonight, what we're going to talk about is a program he's going to do in August. As a matter of fact, if you don't have anything particular that you're planning to do in August, we're back to backing a program with Lee and Jim Ogden that basically puts you in Chattanooga for about 5 days or so, 5-6 days. And Jim is going to talk about Braxton Bragg's plans, and don't blow that off right away. I mean, Bragg, about all we remember Bragg at Chickamauga and Chattanooga was that he wanted to trap the Confederates or the Federals in McLemore's Cove, and he couldn't get it done. But Bragg had some pretty interesting ideas that he intended to implement, and just couldn't get his subordinates to do it. And Jim's going to take a considerable look at that. Conversely, Lee has picked this program for himself, and what it is going to be Wizards of the Saddle, which, we spend so much time focused on the infantry operations in and around Chattanooga. At least says you're really missing a big story in paying attention to cavalry ops and all the different things that we learn from the cavalry on both sides in and around Chattanooga. And so that's what I've asked him to talk about tonight. And just as a matter of reviewing the ground rules, and before I open it up with Lee, is that this discussion between Lee and myself. What you have is you're all muted right now. At a 7:15, you can unmute yourselves. About 45 minutes, or 8:45, I'm sorry. About 45 minutes from now, you can unmute yourselves. If you have a question during the course of what Lee and I talk about, you can to type it up in the chat up there, and I'll look at it and I'll determine when and how to assimilate it into the discussion with Lee. Once we get through some of our basic discussion and so forth, we'll be open to a little more open discussion from about 7:15 on, or 8:45 onwards, until we finish at 9:00. What I ask you to do is just get familiar with your toolbar in Zoom, and the area up there where you see chat. There's also a raise hand and stuff. If you want to ask a question or something, raise your hand just like you do in a classroom, and I'll see it, and I'll basically take you in the order in which they come. But you can help your chances of getting actually on and talking if you maybe just briefly type in your question. The only other thing I ask you to do, and then we'll get started, is The way this is set up, since Lee and I are co-hosts of this, is when you start talking on chat, we see every remark you put up there, and that can be distracting. So please don't get engaged in sidebar conversations or parenthetical talks there, because you're going to be talking to both of us if you do so. We'll see it, and it could disrupt the conversation for other people. So keep the chat to focused on this discussion, and we'll get along fine. And then if everything goes well and a few people want to chat for a minute or two after, to Lee or myself, we'll stay up maybe 5 minutes after we wrap up the formal portion of it. And if nobody wants to talk or anything, we'll shut it down and we'll be gone by about 5 minutes after 9. So with that, Lee, delighted to have you back with us again, with your hat and your low light and your glasses on. You look like Roger Busbus, who led a tour for us in Louisiana. All you have to do is just pull that bill down a little bit more, and all we'll see is your lips moving. So,
I'm not gonna be that bad, Lynn.
no, I don't think so. Glad to have you back again, buddy. It's
Glad to be back.
It's been too long, and I was so delighted. I'm sorry that I missed the Nashville program that you did last December, wrapping up that Hoods, Tennessee campaign, but it was in fact just a bridge too far. I couldn't get there because of family circumstances. But I'm told it was really a really fine time, and I'm glad you've now finished up that series, and now we're turning back to something of interest to you. Tell me why you were interested in doing the cavalry around Chickamauga for this program.
Well, for starters, it's something that just gets a footnote in history, and it's like me and Jim Ogden were actually talking about just the other day, how much is written about certain topics, and you can go ad nauseum, nothing against Gettysburg, but how many books and topics connected to Gettysburg, which is great to see. But then there's certain aspects of the war around Chattanooga and in the West that have never even had a book devoted to it. One of which is these raids I'm wanting to talk about. I think Peter Cozzens in his book on, Shipwreck of Chattanooga maybe gives 3 pages, the Wheelers' October 63 raid. Just looked up Albert Castell. He in the Atlanta campaign, the 18 Wheelers' 64 raid gets a few paragraphs, and that's about it. But I mean, there's enough in these stories that you can devote books to them. And honestly, I'm considering making one of them maybe one of my next writing projects too. So,
it's interesting because with you, I've done the same thing with you that I did that I've done with Jim, which is basically to, for the most part, release you from your parks because you're Western historians, and there's lots of elements to this that you don't normally get to probe because your day-to-day job is going down to Chattanooga or to Chickamauga. But Jim, we've gotten up to Perryville a couple of years ago. We did the bridge burning expeditions in East Tennessee, and what an absolutely, first off, it's gorgeous real estate, but then what a neat story that nobody really knew much at all about, and we probed that. And when you pitched this to me, I said, well, geez, this is kind of the same sort of stuff. This is all the monographs that ought to be written, but they're overshadowed by Dave Powell and his. Of course, Dave has done some cavalry work as well, but nonetheless, you get these campaign studies and stuff, and then you overlook the elements that make Chattanooga such an important area. And I think I'd like to start this really by asking you, why is Chattanooga so important in the war for both sides?
Well, it's interesting in a way, because if you looked at Chattanooga in 1861, and then you heard what President Lincoln says about it in 1862, that taking and holding Chattanooga was just as important as capturing Richmond, you might want to, somebody might want to examine him for mental competence. Chattanooga had a population of 2,500 people in 1860. It's a dirty town. favorite description comes from a young South Carolinian who said it was the last place on the face of the earth any human being should ever have to stay other than Corinth, Mississippi. But it was the place where 4 major rail lines came together. And that was critical for both the South to, on every single day, supplies coming up from Atlanta and Macon, the arsenals down in Macon and other points that come from Chattanooga going on to Virginia or going over to Mississippi or going up into Middle Tennessee. In many ways, it was like the heart of the Confederate supply system. And the U.S. War Department realizes pretty early on is that one of the ways they could win this is to take away the Confederacy's ability to fight it, so Chattanooga becomes a target that way. In Confederate hands, Chattanooga enables them to launch offensives like the Kentucky campaign of '62, and for Bragg to operate in Middle Tennessee again in the spring of '63. And so it kind of, both sides found value in it because in '64, Sherman is going to use it then to enable him to go after the places that were making those supplies that had proved so important earlier in the war.
Well, you know, something else always fascinated me about Chattanooga. Of course, as you know, when I did my master's work, I was working on General Magruder, and one of the things I stumbled across early on was the question of Chattanooga with Daniel Ledbetter in command. Ledbetter, of course, being an engineer, had no combat experience, and after Corinth, Don Carlos Buell starts moving tediously across northern Alabama towards Chattanooga, and Kirby Smith is looking desperately for a combat commander, and so the job is offered to Magruder initially to command at Chattanooga, and he turns it down because he's already received the Trans-Mississippi, and so Henry Heath gets the command, the fourth-ranking Virginian, and he comes over. And of course, as you well know, Buell abandons the campaign because Bragg has already left and moved to Kentucky, and so Chattanooga becomes a supply depot for the Confederates. But the other thing that fascinates me about Chattanooga, and I think leads very well into what you're going to talk about and show, is that the area in and around Chattanooga is a veritable fortress surrounded by some of the most challenging real estate and topography anywhere in the United States during the course of the Civil War. Would you like to talk about that and how it impacts military operations and the maintenance of a garrison in Chattanooga?
Yeah, I mean, and you're exactly right there. I mean, it's like almost like Mother Nature was helping the Confederates in this. Although Bragg would also note at one point, though, yes, it was very aided him, but it also, he never knew, it was like an old house full of rats. He never knew out of which hole the rat was going to pop. And due to all the mountain gaps, but, you know, the way the Tennessee River had flown for millennia, the wear and tear of the mountains, you know, all the mountain ranges from the Cumberland Plateau all the way to the Appalachians, it angles down from northeast to southwest. And for in Union forces moving out of Middle Tennessee, that's one barrier right after another that they've got to face, and then the Tennessee River itself. So it's like natural fortifications placed there. And of course, that definitely Bragg's going to use that to his advantage. But it also, you know, it makes it very difficult for the Union armies to operate against the city logistically as well. You know, that's one thing that I think that's really not appreciated by some folks when they look at Rosecrans's operations, and even Thomas at some point, about why they're so slow. Well, a lot of times it's because of they're such an overly extended supply line. It's having to go through some of the worst terrain any Civil War army ever has to operate in.
Well, and you know, you're right. I think that just like the rivers in Virginia favored the Confederacy because they interdicted the operations, any of the Union operations tried to make against Richmond, it either carried them away from Richmond or carried them down towards the coast. And the challenge of crossing a river, the same challenge, complicated because I think the mountains in themselves were sufficient to really bust the Federals' onions in just about anything they tried to do. The Cumberland Plateau looks to me to be as close to wasteland as it is possible to try to sustain an army over. And then you put that together, and then you put the Tennessee River as wide as it is and as commanded as it is by high ground, to overlook it, such as Lookout Mountain and so forth. And you have got an operation in which just the process of moving an army to that is phenomenal. And I think it's proven when you look. First off, you get Bragg hiding. Bragg gets the ability to use the mountains to hide himself. And then after Rosecrans finally moves down and gets across the Tennessee, the topography again works against him, because you get to the top of places like Sand Mountain and so forth, and they're unlike most mountains you go to. You get to the top of Sand Mountain, and it's a plateau. It's 10, 15, 20 miles across. You don't know you're on top of a mountain, but how you get out of there and then come down to move against the city of Chattanooga puts you in a position, if you make one mistake, as Rosecrans did, and had his forces separated by a score of miles that he couldn't rapidly cover, you've got all sorts of opportunity to be destroyed. So getting to your project, getting to your program, talk about cavalry in and around Chattanooga over the period of time, and tell us about some of the more obscure operations that you're going to show us, and why they're significant in that area.
Mainly I'll focus on two of them, both of them by Joe Wheeler. Wheeler, is going to be basically, he's Bragg's handpicked cavalryman. He's a West Point graduate, class of 1859, extremely young, in his mid 20s, and he really has a complex of really wanting to be like Jeb Stuart, I think. He really wants to raid, and he does some good jobs at times, but sometimes he really gets himself in trouble. But all this is going to, basically, he's going to be given a great opportunity because of these extended supply lines that Rosecrans is having to deal with, and then later on William T. Sherman. They're so long, they have to depend on the rail lines or short distances on the river. And God help them if they have to use the roads, because even as you were mentioning earlier, there are very few good roads. Many of the roads are just glorified footpaths over these mountains and everything. And it just makes, really funnels the supplies through just a few choke points. And ultimately, that's what leads to one of the major raids Wheeler's going to launch out is the one it becomes known as his 1863 raid, Middle Tennessee raid, or sometimes called the Sequatchie Valley raid, although it was more than that, because that's after Chickamauga. Rosecrans is holed up in Chattanooga. Bragg is surrounding the city. He's placing his cannons on Lookout Mountain to control the Tennessee River. And the only route Rosecrans has to bring in supplies is an overland route over to Stevenson, Alabama, and Bridgeport, Alabama, on the banks of the Tennessee River. 30 miles or so by river to get there. But Rosecrans doesn't have that luxury because of Lookout Mountain. He has to has an overland route that's going to be just under 100 miles. And of course, that is ripe fruit for an aggressive Confederate cavalry commander. And that's what actually Bragg envisions. Soon after the siege begins, he's going to pull Wheeler in and basically order him to take his command, ultimately what ends up being the bulk of Forrest's cavalry troops and Wheeler's cavalry troops, roughly 4,000 troopers, a battery of 6 cannon, and basically divide up in 3 divisions and send them into the rear, basically to just wreak havoc. And that's what's going to happen. Wheeler's going to depart out on this just on October 1st. So, Battle of Chickamauga ended on September 20th. So, we're talking 11 days later. He's going to cross over the Tennessee River about 50 miles north of Chattanooga, move over then move over Walden's Ridge, then move down into the Sequatchie Valley, which is described by many soldiers being like a Garden of Eden. And honestly, it still is. Doing some scouting out for the tour for this August, I mean, it's still just absolutely beautiful area. Still large farm fields, a few towns now, but it still hasn't gotten the rapid overgrowth that you've got around Chattanooga. But when Wheeler gets into the Sequatchie Valley, Wheeler's going to do something he has a bad habit of doing. That's he's going to start interpreting the orders a little differently than what his commander had intended. He decides now he's going to go after 2 things at once. He's going to split his command in 2. He's going to send one, take command of 1 division himself and head south to go against the wagon trains that are bringing Rosecrans' supplies in. And he's going to order one of his divisions under General John Wharton to then head over to Cumberland Mountains to strike at McMinnville, Tennessee, which was another supply depot that Rosecrans had set up to, other than the main one down at Stevenson. And that's where it's going to go, kind of how things are going to go initially. Now, the Sequatchie Valley part there where Wheeler's coming down, it's going to be like a cavalryman's dream. And indeed, there's one soldier who pretty much says that. He noted, a trooper in the 4th Tennessee noted that as they came down the valley, the richest scene that the eyes of a cavalryman ever beheld. Along the side of the mountain, hundreds of large federal wagons were standing with their big white covers on them like so many African elephants, solemn in their standing grandeur. And we're not talking 10, 20, 30, 40 wagons. We're talking upwards here of well over 800 wagons.
Wow.
Bringing in the hardtack, the coffees, and so forth for Rosecrans' army. And of course, there's guards, but not near enough. And Wheeler is going to they're going to charge down, engage the reserves, get into several small skirmishes and fights. And then ultimately, they're going to just range up and down the length of this entire wagon train, ultimately killing over 4,000 mules. And put it that way, Lynn, there was a story that they said for years after the war that the sides of the road over there were still covered in the bones of all those animals that had been killed with their traces. And so, we're talking tons of supplies that are going to have been destroyed by this, and all critical, for Rosecrans' survival in Chattanooga. Wheeler is then going to take some of the wagons himself, add it to his own supply train, but largely they're going to burn it. He's even going to basically jump on several officers and men for trying to loot the train. This to say there were men finding sutlers' wagons also in there, so they were getting stuff like, champagne, wine, sardines, oysters, and loading up their saddlebags and stuff with this. I mean, it was just absolute like a cornucopia that they've come into, but then also just the wagon loads of hardtack and other things. And, he's going to tear that up and do that all in better part of a day from around Anderson's crossroads along the side of the mountains there. And then before just breaking it off and then heading over the Cumberland Mountains itself to join up with the other group at McMinnville. And, McMinnville, Wharton's going to approach it on the other side of the Cumberlands, find that it is garrisoned by a regiment, 4th Tennessee U.S. Infantry, whose colonel is actually a son-in-law of Andrew Johnson's. and going to demand the surrender. And without a fight, that he's going to surrender the town to Wharton. And Wharton's men are going to then loot the town and loot the depot. And, it's almost, seen like out of one of John Wayne's horse soldiers,
Yeah,
running about.
when he hits Newton.
Yep.
Yeah.
But there'll be several descriptions of that. But here's one you'll appreciate, Lynn. One of the officers on Wheeler's staff Wheeler has on his staff a Burford.
Really?
Yep. Elisha Burford. And he's going to note, he says, we had the grandest bonfire in the square I ever saw. So they'll burn the supplies and all, and then hang around there for a few days. Wheeler's going to join them at this point. And then he decides, well, now he's destroyed this supply depot. He's destroyed a wagon train, which is the extent of really what Bragg wanted. But now he decides he's going to go hit the railroad at Murfreesboro. He's going to then take off to there, basically see the town's a little too strong for him to charge into like they did at Mingville. So he's going to then hit the railroad south of town, going down toward War Trace, destroying trestles and bridges, and arriving at Shelbyville on October 6th. So almost a week into this. And now at this time, I'm sure folks are asking, well, what are the Union forces doing? Why are they countering this? Well, they are. They're trying to find him initially. 2 federal cavalry divisions are going to be thrown into this. One being Ed McCook, part of that family of McCook serving in the war. Ed would become the cavalryman of the family. He's got a division, and the other division is from a relative newcomer to the Army of the Cumberland, but would be a man that folks may recognize his last name, and that being George Crook.
Yep. Yeah.
And so they're trying to find out where Wheeler is at, and ultimately it's going to be now that the time he's around Shelbyville that they actually finally figure it out and catch up to him. And Wheeler ends up in a very bad post. Near a little town of Farmington, Tennessee. He's not really expecting this. He doesn't really have scouts out trying to keep contact for him. He's camped his men. He's got 2 of his divisions around Farmington itself, but he's got another division, Davidson's division, which has been Forrest Cavalry before all this, posted 2 miles from the main body. And as luck will have it, that will be the ones that get targeted by all this. That will be Crook that's going to come charging down on Davidson's guys, and it's not going to go well. It's going to
What I was going to say was that what really fascinates me about this, and it is not unique. It is absolutely essential to an understanding of any campaign. When Grant starts his overland campaign in 64, his supply line is 100 miles long from DC to Culpeper before he starts. And he realizes that even with Stewart and so forth confined with Mosby, he realizes that he can't sustain that. And during the course of the war, the Shenandoah Valley, the 64 campaign with Sigel and subsequently Hunter, Grant is only asking to disrupt the supply depot for a day. He says, if you can just disrupt the supply depot at Lynchburg for a day, it will do us an immense amount of good, because as we all know, armies in the field, on the march, have to be spread out, because when they consolidate, they're going to be stuck. They're going to consume all the food and supplies in a day or two, and they're going to have supplies coming back. And so, what makes this particularly acute, when you put in mind the challenges of the real estate and the topography that is between Nashville and the Union Army in Chattanooga, you have a very real possibility that a skillfully managed campaign, such as Wheeler is engaged in, can absolutely result in the surrender of the Army.
Yes.
Because they will be out of supply. If they can't reopen, I mean, we all have heard of the cracker line, and that's kind of the abbreviation to what you just described. But the reality of the cracker line is that you got to get supplies to feed this army that is its back is against the Tennessee River. It's got mountains, it's got the Cumberland Plateau behind it, and it's got to get supplies out of Nashville every day into Chattanooga. And now you've got divisions of Confederate cavalry moving around in the operations area of the Tullahoma campaign. You know, yep. Rosecrans been through there, been there, done that. Now Confederates let him come through. There's no big fights there. But now that they've cleared through there and they're counting on it to be supply line, here comes the cavalry. And
yep.
And now you've got a severe problem for the Union, because we're not just talking about disrupting a day. You could be talking about disrupting it for a week or more at a time if you don't get those people out of there. You mentioned Crook. What does Rosecrans do in response to this raid on his supplies?
Well, he actually turns to his chief of cavalry, who had been largely absent due to sickness, that being General Mitchell, prior to the Chickamauga camp, the fighting at Chickamauga. And so Mitchell he's going to basically turn Mitchell and tell Mitchell to go find Wheeler and to take care of this. And of course, then the problem is they have to find him to begin with. And of course, they're looking in the Sequatchie Valley initially. More or less, they're having to react to places he's popping up.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be ultimately the problem, is that one group's going to be, when Wheeler's hitting, the area around War Trace, they're showing up around McMinnville. So they're, behind and several days behind. But part of this now that's going to aid them is that the Wheeler at this point has ranged so far so quickly that the horses are giving out. He's not being able to cover the miles that he did very quickly at the beginning of the campaign. And now Crook and them are showing up in relatively fresh shape. And add to it, Wheeler had even at the very beginning had commented on the shape of Forrest cavalry being skeleton brigades. Literally so many men killed and wounded in the engagements before and leading up to Chickamauga. And I think that's all really going to start bearing down on them right now. They've simply kind of a bridge too far, so to speak, at this point. So
let me ask you a logistics question, because you hit the nail on the head, and I'm reminded of Van Dorn's march to get to the rear of Curtis at Pea Ridge, and he takes the Bentonville bypass, and he wears out his horse flesh so significantly that he's almost put people in the Federal rear at Pea Ridge with their mouths open and panting, that they've worn out the flesh. And it seems to me that there is a consistency in these young, born to ride Southerners who become cavalry commanders and stuff, in that they seem to lack intuitive sense as to how to take care of their horse flesh. They're hell bent for leather to take advantage of opportunities, but then once they've done that, they've worn them out and so forth. And ultimately, I think you're suggesting it. Are you willing to say that you think that probably that perhaps Wheeler overextended himself,
Oh,
um,
definitely.
and perhaps ultimately fails because of that lack of control over his own operations?
Yes, and his men too. That's another side story. But Wheeler, basically, it seems like he goes to sees one glittering gem after another. Like somebody with some OCD. Kind of the joke goes, he's so easily distracted and keeps running down rabbit holes. So, Bragg's initial mission was to strike at the supply lines. I think this side of the Cumberland Mountains, and Wheeler keeps going after one target, one target. Like you said, drug him all the way back onto the same playing field they were at during the Tullahoma campaign. And he just keeps going after these glittering baubles, and the horses just can't keep up with it. He's losing men now, and it's just a sadly a reoccurring theme when it comes to Wheeler, and and you see it with some other officers as well, but especially with Joe Wheeler. He
Well,
really,
they used to say that sometimes you can outrun your punt coverage, and
yeah,
it looks to me that Wheeler, he has the right plan, but the field that he engages in, I mean, all he has to do is disrupt the supply line. And instead, what the hell is he doing in Murfreesboro?
right,
You know
exactly,
what? Because if you go that far, you got to come all that way back again.
right, and have to be able to have a clear way back.
That's right. You got to
And
fight your way out of it.
yeah,
And so what potentially should have resulted in the surrender of the Union Army because they were starving, um, ends up getting attenuated. I won't say it failed. I just say it gets attenuated because, as you said, kind of an OCD thing of, oh, look at that, I'll take that over there. Oh, I'll take that. Instead of just understanding it, all he had to do was find a spot that he was secure and keep the line closed for a day or 2 or 3 days. I mean, if Grant says to Hunter, all I want you to do is if you can disrupt the supplies from Lynchburg for 1 or 2 days at
yeah,
most, you will do me tremendous good. And it seems to me that that's all that would have been necessary to destroy Rosecrans' army, and instead he's playing whack-a-mole.
yep,
He's running around and doing bits and pieces. Let me ask you this: because of, I mean, Joe Wheeler's a youngster. Wheeler doesn't go
yes,
away. I mean, he's a general in the Spanish American
right.
War, and so forth. And of course, we've got his homestead in northern Alabama. But in your assessment of all this, clearly, and I don't think there's any disagreement here, but I do want to get your insight into it. It strikes me that probably the better person for this was certainly would have been Forrest, but I think the bridge has been burned between Forrest and Bragg. I don't think that
Yep.
Forrest has got he doesn't have any chits to play because he's been sat on, or either that or he's crapped his way out of it. He doesn't want any part of Bragg. What tell us about the Forrest Bragg conundrum?
Okay, yeah. There's two point issues at this point. First, Forrest was already wanting out. Ultimately, Forrest, is always going to be better on his own than he is with an army.
Yeah.
Like the young school kids, report cards, he does not play well with others. Uh, Forrest, anytime he's with the army, he chafes. He just cannot really work well. And that includes under not only Bragg, but later with Hood, but even in Mississippi under S.D. Lee, there's just chafing and problems. And yeah, Raid was phenomenal, but add to that, he had already asked in August to be transferred back to West Tennessee, North Mississippi, and Bragg had resisted at that point in the campaign. But now, but the one thing that kind of gets missed in a lot of this is right before Chickamauga, Forrest is wounded in a skirmish down near Tunnel Hill, Georgia. And that on top of the wounds from the summer of 63, when he was shot by Lieutenant Gould in Columbia, then was wounded again in the actions in Middle Tennessee. This again, it's all catching up with him health-wise. And his surgeon is going to insist after Chickamauga, more or less, that he take a break, to go to try to physically recover.
Try to recruit himself, yeah.
So he's actually going to depart the Army to take leave down to LaGrange, Georgia, where his wife is refugee. And so physically, he's not in much shape to undertake something like this at this point, let alone the personality issues he's having with Bragg at this, by that point as well. So really, Bragg, he basically didn't have much of a choice other than Wheeler at that point, due to all of that, all the stuff that had already built up with Forrest, but also with Forrest's health at this point.
That's an excellent. I was unaware of that, and I think that really, because I think the marquee, Forrest insults Bragg, says, if you were half a man, I'd slap your face and cause you to resent it. If you ever cross me again, it will be the peril of your life. That's what the headlines say. But then you read the rest of the story, and he was on the DL.
Yeah.
He was on the 15-day DL, and he couldn't have done what needed to be done, even if he'd been ordered to do it. And but I do think that Bragg probably liked Wheeler more because
definitely.
Wheeler was sycophantic. Wheeler was young, so he was more easily influenced. The comparison you make between Stewart and Wheeler, I think the essence of what made Stewart so valuable to Lee was he was not just one generation; he was 2 generations removed. I mean, Lee was like a grandfather to him rather than just a father. And
right.
And as a result, properly regulated, Stewart could do marvelous things. And when he wasn't regulated, he sometimes got into trouble. And Wheeler obviously had the same situation. He had independence, and he went out and he got in trouble. He was effective to the extent that it caused a change in command. That something had to be done. And even though Rosecrans had already come up with a plan that ultimately Grant would implement, the fact of the matter is that Dana and those people were really very, very worried that Wheeler was going to be successful.
Yeah.
And was being successful.
And I mean, it's getting reported all through the headlines, Wheeler's ranging out, striking all these places. They're afraid he's going to come into Nashville, even in the papers. And he's being unchecked. That's the other thing that's, causing the panic, is that, Wheeler seems to be just popping up and there's nobody there to stop him.
Doesn't he also, I'm just, and I know this, but it's slipping my mind right now. When he drifts up, he actually he rides himself out of the campaign.
Yes, pretty much.
I mean, so this is more than just losing track of his field of operations. He actually drifts out of the operational control of Braxton Bragg at a point in which perhaps he might even have been able to interdict the solution at Brown's Ferry. If he'd been around, he might have stopped that.
Yeah, and adding to it, Lynn, he's missing the chance to stop Hooker's guys when they're coming down by rail through Nashville, through that same area. By that point that they're doing that, he's already just his force is too wiped out. They're going to escape into North Alabama after that fight at Farmington, And then Crook and all them are going to be pulled back, to guard the supply lines in Middle Tennessee, and allowing that to happen. But Wheeler's going to have to spend several weeks in North Alabama because of the condition his horses are in.
Yeah.
And by the
Yeah.
time he's pulled back in, instead of staying in Chattanooga, he's ordered to go with Longstreet into East Tennessee.
And then doesn't, again, focused on cavalry, isn't this nearly the same time that Morgan begins to drift out of control as well, and is not in a supporting position?
Right.
So Bragg has ostensibly been abandoned by two sets of eyes and ears that might have, because the supply line, we talk about Nashville, but what's the next spot up the line above Nashville? It's Louisville.
Louisville. Yep.
Yeah. And then Cincinnati. So and Indianapolis. So you look at those, and you look at what is necessary, and Grant saw the same thing. You remember Grant has got this problem in West Tennessee in '62 when he's trying to move into northern Mississippi. These huge supply depots in the north, of which I think probably Louisville is the most significant of all of them until Nashville falls, and then it becomes the forward operating base. It becomes the Guam. Louisville becomes the
Very
Guam
good analogy
of that. Where Nimitz moves out and he leaves Pearl Harbor, and forward operating base Westpac becomes Guam, and that's what happens to Nashville. Is Nashville suddenly becomes the place to stage all the supplies that had been previously at Louisville, and so you've got this. It's just endlessly fascinating. But Van Dorn and Forrest are successful in interdicting Grant in December of '62, and the result is that Grant has to come all the way back from Oxford, back to Holly Springs, and back to Memphis to retool the operation. And one wonders what would have happened had Wheeler had the same discipline that Forrest and Van Dorn had. What would have happened to Rosecrans? He may not have been able to fall back because he probably can't cross the river under the observation of Bragg's army.
Right. And I mean, it's just something to behold. When you look, it's like the scales judging things with Wheeler and all this. He's going to cover over 300 miles in 9 days with his cavalry. He's going to destroy over 1,000 wagons, supply depot at McMinnville. So those are all the pluses. He's capturing these supply wagons and all. But at Farmington, he has to abandon all of his artillery. So he loses his 6 cannon. He loses all of those wagons that he had captured in the Sequatchie Valley, and plus some of the ones he had with him. And then the most telling thing is he crossed over with, around 4,500 troopers, and he shows back up in Chattanooga to go into East Tennessee with 2,500. Now, of course, most of them are not dead, but you took a bunch of Middle Tennessee cavalrymen back into Middle Tennessee, and many of them stay behind.
Yeah, they see Mama and the family, and they think about all this, and they're seeing what they're going through, and that was always a thing. You were always careful about where you expose the troops to, and your casernes and your garrisons, even in modern forces. You always kept the troops away from the lights of the city, because you would lose your combat effectiveness. And of course, he loses 40% of his force. And the thing I want to kind of wrap up our private conversation with this is that we're both military historians, and we spent a lot of time talking about things. And of course, the thing that I find consistent throughout modern history is always the fixation on interdicting lines of supply and lines of communication. And we hear terms used, interior lines and exterior lines and so forth, but there is no more critical element to a army in the field than its supply line. And the objective is, just about everything. It's like looking at the mushroom effect of a nuclear weapon. The energy of that nuclear weapon is in the stem of the mushroom. That's the thing that is coming up and doing that. Is the energy always falls in the line of supply, whether it's a natural reaction like a nuclear explosion, or the dynamic of a moving army that has to have a secure means of receiving their supplies and their bullets, and to move their non-combatants back and forth and so forth. And so war has always been about interdicting. When D-Day, we worked to cut Rommel off from his supplies, so his reinforcements. We understood that fighting on the beaches was going to be bloody, but our emphasis and our interdiction was not to try to blast the fortifications off of Omaha and Utah beaches. It was to cut the bridges 30, 40, 50 miles behind the beaches to ensure that after we fought out, the people who were front to us, Red Rosecrans, if you cut him 50 miles in the rear, he would eventually wither and die on the vine. He couldn't survive. And that's what this is all about. And this I think is the real beauty of studying Chattanooga and all its permutations. And that's why I'm kind of envious that you and Jim have had 20 plus years to move around and look in all the nooks and crannies, because we're going to go to most of those places, aren't we?
Yep. There's a lot of little hidden gems. I mean, stuff that's untouched from 1863 till now in some of those outlying areas. So
yeah, and it's just something I always like in a lot of these programs. This is not the Battle of Chattanooga. It's not the Battle of Chickamauga, but this is like putting the 500-piece puzzle together, and you know what the picture is. But isn't it neat when you get all the clouds and everything else that go in, and you finally get the whole puzzle put together? And I think this puts together that puzzle. What I'm going to invite people to do, it's about 10 minutes of 9 now, is Karen, if it's okay that they unmute themselves, I think they can do that. If you want to unmute yourselves, and if you want to raise your hand and ask a question, we'll take that. And so it's not to cheat you all out of anything. Lee and I will continue to talk about some things, and then I will fold in any questions you may want to have. But this is your 10 or 15 minutes if you got a question. So, raise your hand and I'll spot that, and we'll get you folded in. But what other things do you think are really stay with you as a result of having focused on the cavalry operations during the Chattanooga portion of the campaign? What sticks with you as an observant historian?
well, one thing it's really, really looking at this is just, again, how far away some of these things for the struggle Chattanooga are occurring. It's not just there 10, 20 miles in Chattanooga. You got events that are deciding the fate of this city. They're occurring 100 miles away, up in Middle Tennessee, back in that area. There's issues occurring up in East Tennessee, all due to this. And again, we tend to view, Civil War battles and areas of operations being pretty tight compared to modern operations. But this really, shows, Wheeler's operating 100 miles in the rear, and there's Union cavalry coming after him 100 miles to the rear of the army. And, Wheeler's crossing the river 50 miles north of Chattanooga. And, that's also bringing alarm bells in, and with Ambrose Burnside at Knoxville. And so, I mean, it's just how big of a sphere, this struggle actually was for Chattanooga at that point in the war.
The other thing that I'm just again remarkably impressed by the Cumberland Plateau as a planning obstacle. I marvel at Rosecrans' guts. He showed something to me in his operations that Joe Johnston, in his natural conservatism, couldn't conceptualize and turn into an operational plan in '64 when Davis really wants Johnston's army to take the offensive and re-enter Tennessee at the start of the spring campaign of '64. Johnston, of course, and I have to say this in fairness to Johnston, because of the Cumberland Plateau and Sand Mountain and all of these other obstacles, because not only does he have to move an army probably through Snake Creek Gap, which is then telegraphing his move, not only does he have to move his army through Snake Creek Gap, he has now got to front the Tennessee River somewhere. And Sherman, by this point, has three armies with him: Cumberland, Tennessee, and the Ohio armies. And so Johnston, and I've been a critic of Johnston's. I don't like Joe Johnston. I think he was poorly placed as a commander, and should have never gotten out of 1862 with a command. But I do think that, again, because of the very unique nature of the terrain around Chattanooga. I mean, look what Hood has to do. To get across, he has to slide all the way down to Florence in the Muscle Shoals. He can't even begin to think of crossing that area and stuff. That's just how damning it is for somebody trying to move an army and move supplies. Can't be done.
And I mean, that plays out again with Wheeler in '64 when he tries to hit the same thing, raid up to go up back in the middle of Tennessee. He gets to the place he crossed in '63. Tennessee River's too high. He can't cross there. He ultimately has to range up 200 miles further to find a place to cross the Tennessee. So again, you can't, the weather's then, not that they can predict weather much better today, but, that affected operations as well. You can make all the plans you want, but then when it starts raining for 3 or 4 days, that plan's scrapped.
Yeah. And I just, when you go over and you look at the area where Hood eventually crosses, that in and of itself, I find it miraculous. The only reason I think Hood gets across there, because again, he sidestepped all of that terrain challenge that goes from Bridgeport all the way across to the valley that runs up to Knoxville. Is it so affects his operations that he operates on the Western Atlantic Railroad and then sidesteps all the way over some 70 or 80 miles. And I think the only reason he gets across the river is, I do think that Sherman miscalculated in what Thomas could and would do. He only had Schofield. He sends Schofield back across, and Schofield could move to the point of contact. In other words, Schofield could be counted on to move to the spot in which Hood would try to cross. And why he didn't do so, I'm not sure. I think, again, probably because, we did that terrain and we crossed the Tennessee and we worked our way up to Columbia. I think that was very sparse area for Schofield to operate on. I think, he had to stay in the vicinity of what Pulaski and
he had to stay on the railroad. He had to
stay on the railroads because he himself could not handle that. And he of course, then he drops all the way back. So, and for those of you guys listening to this, where we're going with this is just, if you look from above and then look around, and most of you, I'm sure, have been in the Chattanooga area, I think we're just marveling at what Rosecrans accomplished to get to Chattanooga without being battered up and bashed up. And then that's what I think leads in also to Jim's program, which makes the two of them such a great fit, is that, you know, Bragg has got a great place to operate from. He's got all sorts of things going for him, except he's got a bad command situation. He's got people that are reticent to obey him, and they don't like him, and they don't trust him, and so consequently, this perfect operational platform that he has. I mean, you go back to McLemore's Cove, and he could have destroyed that Union force in McLemore's Cove. He should have destroyed that force in McLemore's Cove. And what happens to the campaign if he does so? And yet, so, you know, you give people the tools, and then you see what they do. That's why we call military art. There's a science to the military, and there's an art to the military, and this becomes the art of that. And so I'm really, because people have, you know, we do lip service every time we do a tour of Chattanooga, Chickamauga, Chattanooga. If you're going to do Chickamauga or Chattanooga, the first thing you do is you spend a half a day doing Brown's Ferry, and you say, "Oh, look, they broke the cracker line, or they set up the cracker line and open up the supplies." But no program that I've ever seen takes the time to actually go up and look at how the terrain is managed and how it affects this operation. And so for those people who have done Chickamauga and stuff before, I think this is tailor made to fill in those building blocks for it, and I'm really excited about it. Well, we must either we put everybody to sleep or whatever the case might be. I mean, I invited them to raise their hands. Nobody raised their hands. You know, it reminds me of the movie Animal House. You remember when Donald Sutherland is up there and he's trying to teach him about the apple and Dante, and he takes a bite out of the apple. And he says, "Hey, I'm serious. This is my job." You know, and oh, Suanne, there is a raised hand. Okay, let me see. I don't see. I apologize to you because
Hey,
I didn't see a raised hand. So
can you guys hear?
I can hear.
All right.
Okay, whose
Well,
raised
Lee,
hand is it?
you knew that I was going to have to say something.
Oh yeah, Chris. I
Who
work
is
with
this?
Chris Young. He's another ranger at Chickamauga. He has ancestors though that are involved in this.
Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Well, you know, Lee, I was wondering if during your research on this, you know, and I'm trying to remember everything that I've read about weather,
Oh yeah,
because I think that looking at this, you know, thinking about the 19 of 31 days that it rained in October,
yeah,
you know, and that I think it's one of Wilder's guys that talks about the mud at the bottom of the Anderson Turnpike being up to the belly of his horse. You know, when you were doing this research, had you found anything about weather conditions or anything like that that might give us some insight?
yeah. I mean, it is. It's raining most of this campaign. Uh, you know, when Wheeler crosses the river, it's raining, and when he's going up over the Cumberland Plateau, it's raining, and I think that's aiding him in being able to do some of the things he's doing, but also, you know, helping him with the U.S. cavalry pursuit.
Mhm.
That it's slowing them down as well.
Yeah, I think just listening to this conversation, sometimes it's really easy, and we've had these discussions before of um it's really when we put ourselves into positions like even in the Sequatchie Valley or on Walden's Ridge or even down in the valley in Chattanooga, we always want to be there on a nice sunny day.
Yeah.
But often we forget that these campaigns are occurring when the weather is sunny or when the weather is cold or when the weather is just, when you're drenched by rain. And I think that I wanted to ask, what you had come up with or what you had seen as the campaign is progressing out toward Farmington and into Middle Tennessee, as far as hindrances to the pursuit or to the engagements even.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I mean, like I said, this raid lasts 9 days, and
Mhm.
I'd say 75% of that 9 days, 7 of the days is probably raining,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
definitely going to be taking its toll on the horses wearing out, particularly by the time they get to Farmington.
Oh, sure, sure. Yeah. Thanks, Lee. I appreciate
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Chuck, thank you for the question, incidentally, because that really is a significant point. I remember, and oftentimes um, we do lose track of the weather. I know in the Peninsula campaign, especially in the 7 days, it rained almost every day of the siege of Yorktown, and people were in trenches and water up to their waists, and that had a huge impact on operations. And 160, 70 years later, oftentimes we forget. I mean, the Battle of Newmarket, the charge of the cadets, takes place in a pouring rainstorm,
Well, I
which
think
is
I think talking about cavalry here, even Yellow Tavern, when we think of Stuart's mortal wounding, we don't think about the thunderstorm that's occurring there at Yellow Tavern and the booming of the thunder that's that could be misconstrued as cannon fire, or even standing at the mule shoe at Spotsylvania the same day, that it's coming a thunderstorm there. We like to put ourselves in these positions um, where we see them clearly on beautiful days, but we tend not to think about, well, even with Rosecrance's supply trains, or and movement over the mountain here, just the effects of weather and moving with horses, and how thinking about Wilder's men at the bottom of Walden's Ridge, saying, whether it was really up to the horse's belly or not, but thinking about slugging through through the mud, and even Burnside's mud march, and just the 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 taxing movements on the men. What does that do to the horses, and the cavalry of Wheeler, and the cavalry that's pursuing him.
great point. Hey, Sue Ann, thank you for bringing it to my attention. For some reason or another, the raised hand did not appear on my screen, and so I didn't see it. Is there anybody else there that wants to make a comment? We're about five after, and I'm about ready to wrap this one up. So, uh, any other comments? So you can unmute, and we'll start to wind this down. Going. Say something, Lee, so I can look at you.
All right.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. All I saw was this little avatar of Chuck,
Yeah.
and he was gone. So, folks, we sure appreciate you taking the time to be with us. This program is going to take place in August. I'll have the registration forms up this weekend, and I hope you'll consider coming on out. I think if you look at the ground we covered in just an hour, think about a couple of days just immersed in this. I think you'll have a really fine time with a historian that I admire a great deal. Um, so thank you so much for your time, Lee. Karen,
Welcome.
thank you for your help. And if anybody wants to just make a social comment or something, we'll call this a night, and and anybody wants to pop up and say hi, you can say hi, and then we'll shut down in 5 minutes. So thanks very much, and thank you, Lee, and good night, folks.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, some folks are typing
Okay.
remarks.
Yeah.
That works for me. Did I see Dave Bradley? Is that Dave from
Yep.
England?
Why
Yes,
Yep.
it is Dave Bradley from England, but I'm currently in Jersey City.
Well, I'll be darned. Dave Bradley coming and checking in from Jersey City. He's a Londoner, Lee. So, I think he's the first international we've had on one of these. So you brought him out of the woodworks.
Okay.
You did, yes. It's been very interesting. Enjoyed it very much.
Well,
glad.
good. I think I'm supposed to come over there and talk to you guys in September on the 17th. Lee, have you been over to England before?
No, that's on my bucket list, the short bucket list. I want to get over there in the next few years. So,
Well, Dave,
Well,
here's one of your speakers. All you have to do now is find him a plane ticket.
Yeah, that should be easy enough. I can arrange that, I'm sure. Also,
But wait
looking
a
forward to
second.
seeing
When
you
I
in.
come over to talk, you guys don't get a plane ticket for me. I have to pay
Well,
my own way.
You're so rich, lad. You don't need it. Oh,
That's okay. We're gonna fix you real soon. We're Blue and Gray in September's coming out with our guidebook on the first American Customs immigration program at Yorktown. So we're gonna put that book out and sell it to folks. All the places that we disinvited the Brits from inhabiting in 1775 through 1783. You'll find that they're numerous.
well, I'm here to take it all back, I can assure you.
Well, there are parts of it we'll let you have back. I mean, give us $24 worth of trinkets and you can have Manhattan. You know. And
Well, I can nearly see Manhattan from where I am now.
well, you see, there you
Very
have it.
nearly.
There's your problem. And I see we've got Lauren here. Lauren, are you looking in from Los Angeles?
Hey, hi, Len. Good to see you.
It's been a while. Good to see you as well.
You know, I wanted to go to that Shenandoah trip you did last fall, but I just could not make it. And I'm still here. I'm still part of you guys. I love these lectures. I love what Lady Lincoln's doing. Thank you, Karen. That is just awesome. And I just love hearing all these conversations. And then I just go running to all my books to get the background on all these different battles and situations that you guys are talking about.
Well, it's a lot of fun. And, what do they say? I've been doing this. This is now my 29th year of doing this. And Lee, how long have you been in the business?
oh God. Well, doing this professionally, it's about here in less than a week. It'll be 22 years with the Park Service. So,
Wow.
You know,
Thank you.
You
Thank you
can't
for your
believe
service.
you get paid
Thank
to
you.
do this. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Unlike you, Len, right?
yeah.
well, I
You
don't
know how
get
this
paid
goes.
that much to do it though. There were more lucrative occupations
Well,
I could have.
well, if I didn't do this, I'd have to work for a living, So
Right.
why would I want to do that? And
Lee,
Tom,
where are you based at, Lee?
I'm just inside North Georgia, so not far from Chattanooga.
Near Chattanooga. Okay.
Yeah.
I was with Len on the trip to, we did Chickamauga and then Northern Georgia, Dalton, Ritzika and all that. That was such a great trip. I just loved that trip. And I know that I would love the next trip and I will be on another trip. This will not be my last trip.
Well, I certainly hope not. Because if you've got money, I'm still looking to part you from it. Part of my mission in life is to go find everybody who's got spare coins sitting in their purse and to remove it. I mean, I particularly like getting the Brits money because nothing like a penny in a pound.
Right?
And I'm always getting their money.
Well, you got my money. Now you just got to get my time. That's my big hang up right here. Getting from LA back east, I'm telling you, you know what? It's a problem.
Well, you know
Well,
what?
it is. It's a lousy flight. I mean, everywhere you go, you either have to leave dark 30 in the morning and then you fly the whole day away, or worse than that, they put you on a damn red eye. And I'm too damn old to fly red eyes. I don't like them, don't want to be bothered.
I just did one and I wasn't happy about it, let me tell you. But once I got there, I was fine. But
Yeah,
anyway.
Flying to England is always a problem because almost all their flights are overnight. And if I get lucky enough to get into New York or Newark or someplace where I can get a morning flight, that's great. But those overnight flights invariably are only 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. And
you know, that's the thing. But coming from here, I mean, sometimes I'd rather do it. So I'm there. I've got the day. I've got it. I didn't lose a whole day in traveling because between the time change and the hours of the flight. By the way, Karen, I sent you an email. Did you see it?
Oh, no.
I mean, not an email, a text. I sent you a chat. I sent you a chat message.
Oh, okay. Let me check.
So anyway, it sounds like a great trip.
yeah, well, we look forward to it, and we'll get you back out with us again. In the meantime, just keep coming and enjoying and stuff. And you know, I appreciate your support. Appreciate it
I'm happy
tremendously.
to support you guys. This whole thing just lifts me up. When I start talking, people know now, don't ask me about the Civil War. I mean, listening to you guys, PhDs and all this is like crazy. You know, I'm this amateur little West Coaster here. And people are like, really? How do you know that? Where'd you get that from? And I'm like knowing nothing compared to what you guys are knowing. And there's still people are like amazed. And I'm like, wait, you don't even know the half of this. That's just the tip of the iceberg.
You know
Well,
what?
you know the thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Karen.
Now, academians have become very lazy. I mean, I can't tell you how many books they've written on the same Lincoln papers over at the Library of Congress instead of coming over to the archives and opening boxes and actually doing research.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much new scholarship just waiting to happen, but they're too lazy
Wow.
to open up a box and do their work.
I would love to delve into those subjects that nobody else is. Len, I think I emailed you. I'm reading The Jews in the Civil War book by Sarna and Mendelsohn.
Oh, okay.
Are you familiar with it?
I don't know that one. The last one I read was Confederate Jews by Robert Rosen, which is an outstanding book. Is this a relatively new book?
No, it's not. It's from like 2000, 2005 or something, but it is an anthology of various articles. And I think the Rosen article is in there. The Bernard Corn article is in there. So it's not just a whole, like a story. There's just different articles that touching on different aspects of it. You know, just the tip of the iceberg about the Grant thing, which I have a whole book on the Grant thing. You know, if it's related to Jews and the Civil War, I'm reading it.
Well, you know,
I try. This is a focus I want to take because most people have no concept of what was going on, whether it was the slavery issue, whether it was fighting, whether it was the North versus the South, the history of Jews coming into this country and where they ended up and why they ended up there, and their treatment in the North versus being in the South. It's a really fascinating subject.
now, are you familiar with the Jewish Civil War Soldier Project?
I think it was touched on in this book or something I just read recently. No,
Yeah,
but no.
They've literally been going through every single one of the Civil War military service records to find Jewish soldiers, whether they're Union or Confederate. And I'm not sure whether they're where they're housed at, because with COVID, all of us were thrust out of the archives.
Wow.
Where we had all of our equipment set up and we could leave it there so that we could work. And so now we have to take it in and out when we come. And NARS decided they want to try and make appointments permanent. And, I know all the upper management, they know me. And I've told them that researchers are not hobbyists, that we come in, 9 to 5 every single day. And that we have time sensitive information that we need to gather. And this thing of, an appointment and banker's hours is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a contradiction to the whole point behind it because, Lauren, you made a really, really fine point, and I don't wish to be rude. I see Tom Lethan, you're still on. Tom, did you want to make a comment or something? I don't want to cause you to have to wait patiently and endlessly. Okay, perhaps he's where he may not be on and just hadn't disconnected or something. But anyway, no, I enjoy just like anytime real historians get together. I just enjoy talking with Lee and other historians, and you sit back and you start tying things together, and it makes the conversation go a lot easier, I think. And we didn't do any planning at all for this conversation. We just sat down and we just started talking. And
Well, you got two guys who know the questions to ask and the answers to be given. So I loved it. It was great.
well, and then a comment pushes you to the next point. In other words, Lee will say something and it will trigger a connection in my mind. I'll say, yeah, I remember this, and so forth. And then I'll come up with something there, and then Lee will pick up and stuff. And that's really all the fun that's in this business is actually talking history. And when you get done, you say, oh, I'm a little smarter for the experience. And so that's why we keep doing that. But anyway, it's 9:15. I promised to get off by then. My wife has been patiently allowing me to have the house quiet until I get finished. So,
Well, it's only 6:15 here, so no worries.
okay, well, you go ahead and you chat with Karen, because Karen knows the archives like nobody's business, and she'll make you a happy camper. So, and
Well, we're gonna
in the
connect.
meantime, make her happy. Send her money.
Thank you, guys. It was Lee, it was great. Thank you.
You're
Love
welcome.
And Lauren, the thing that you dialed into, that's my personal room. So, you can always send me an email at karen.needles@gmail.com anytime you want to Zoom and get together.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay. I'm at A1 downtown on Mondays and Tuesdays until 5 o'clock. And then I'm at A2 on Wednesdays and Thursdays.
Where are you? Downtown where?
Oh, Washington, D.C. I live in College Park, Maryland.
Okay, cool.
Okay. I knew I was going to be at the archives. And so we moved from Kansas and came out here in 99. I had a 3-year not to exceed job with the Library of Congress, training teachers
Oh,
primary source documents.
Which is where I met her.
that's where you get all this from. I get it.
Yeah. I mean, I started using computers in the 1980s before there was an operating system. I was an education specialist with IBM when they had an education department.
Love it. Wow.
I love technology, but technology has its place.
All right, I'll tell you what, I'll send you an email. We'll hop on a Zoom call one day and we'll talk it all through.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
You guys, thanks very much. Len, go to your wife, go have dinner, and Lee, go enjoy your evening. Take care. Bye, Karen. Talk to you
Thanks,
soon.
Lauren.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tall. Thanks, Lee. Good to see you again, Karen.
Thank you, Lynn.
As always,
Okay.
thank you.
Yes, thank you, Karen. So,
Nightly.
uh,
Yep. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.